So the current lightweight champion of the UFC is Islam Makhachev, and in honor of UFC 302, where he fights Dustin Poirier next week, I'm going to go through every single one of his UFC fights and give them a grade. Now, this is purely based on how Islam Makhachev performed in these matchups, not on entertainment or even if I liked the fight. This is just purely based on how good he was in the octagon at that moment. Now, Islam has been fighting in the UFC since 2015. Some of these fights were before my time. I was like 15 years old. So forgive me if I don't have all of the context down pat. I had to go through and pretty much binge watch some of these fights that he had back then. But I did watch these fights. I did see Islam Makhachev's overall improvement as the years have gone on. And I have pretty much a good grasp of every single fight that he has had in the UFC. So without further ado, let's dive right into this and let's break down and give a grade to every single Islam Makhachev performance in the UFC. Now, Islam Makhachev's first fight in the UFC was against this man named Leo Kuntz. I'm not saying it the other way. It's spelled Kuntz. That can be interpreted in another way, but we're keeping it PG here. But against Leo Kuntz, he mainly did most of his work by striking. He did get some takedowns, only 3, but he mainly won this fight by using his striking against Leo Kuntz. Now, his striking at the time didn't look good at all. It was very basic, very fundamental. He didn't really throw strikes like a good striker, which he was a grappler, has a combat sambo background. So you do expect that from Islam Makhachev. But when he fought Leo Kuntz, he got a takedown in the first round, got the back almost immediately. It was pretty clear the game plan should be getting to the back of Leo Kuntz, which he did end up doing in the second round. I don't know if he hurt Leo Kuntz or headbutted him. It was kind of a weird situation where Leo Kuntz went in for a strike. He fell down awkwardly. Islam took his back almost immediately, and then pretty much after that got the rear naked choke in the second round. It's a pretty simple fight, not the most entertaining, but I think Islam's performance in this was worthy of a good debut. I think that this fight showed that he is willing to strike on the feet if he needs to, and that he isn't a total slouch in that aspect. But this was 2015, so this was a young and new Islam Makhachev to the MMA world. Again, he was doing combat sambo, had a little bit of MMA background, but this wasn't a full-fledged developed Islam Makhachev. He gets the win by second round rear naked choke. I'm giving this fight just an A. I mean, he dominated the first round and then dominated the second round as well. He pretty much just went out there and had a good UFC debut, finished this guy by rear naked choke. It was pretty simple for him, pretty easy. A day in the office for Islam Makhachev. He wins this fight by dominance and then gets the finish. Just a quick spoiler, this video might get a bit redundant because Islam just had such a dominant career, especially early in his career. He was just always just winning fights by grappling, dominant grappling, or getting a submission with this dominant grappling. It's just tough to really knock him too many points because he was so dominant early on in his UFC days. And even now, he still is kind of dominant. But we move on to a fight where he wasn't dominant in, where he actually got finished brutally by Adriano Martins, got knocked out cold, and that's pretty much the whole story of this fight. Islam Makhachev just went out there, he threw the same punches consistently, and it allowed Adriano Martins to time him and then eventually counter him, and he countered him pretty well and then put him down and then TKO'd him. There's not much to really talk about with this fight. It mainly just was Islam going out there and kind of half-assing the striking, and he wasn't ready for it. His first fight with Leo Kuntz, he got away with it, but in this fight, Adriano Martins was a way better striker than Leo Kuntz, and he just got caught doing the same thing over again. This one is an easy F for me. He got TKO'd by Adriano Martins. This was his worst performance of his entire UFC career. It's his only loss in his entire career. Easy F. Moving on to Chris Wade, which was his third fight in the UFC. Now, Chris Wade gave him some issues. Islam had a triangle in the first round where Chris Wade was able to escape that and then just sit on top of Islam for the majority of that round. I gave Chris Wade that first round, but it was pretty clear that Islam Makhachev was the better fighter in this fight. Chris Wade did have a few guillotine attempts where he was pretty close to submitting Islam, but I think Islam just knew how to escape those positions. It just didn't work. Chris Wade kept going for the guillotine and it didn't work out for him, and Islam was able to pretty much ride out on top and do damage, have really solid control time in that second and third round, and it allowed for him just to pretty much get a clear win, 28-29, 29-28 on the scorecards. He beats Chris Wade fairly easily, just outside outside the guillotine attempts and the triangle attempt that failed for him and that lost him that first round. So I have to give this fight a B, because he did lose a round. And if we're going by Islam Makhachev standards, he has such a high standard for me with these fights that I have to give him a lower grade for losing a round, which for most fighters isn't really a big deal. But for Islam Makhachev and his scoring criteria, I'm making him losing a round more weighted, so I'm giving him a B. You could score this fight higher, but he did make a mistake. He did lose a round, had a tough first round again. He still won the fight pretty clearly. Definitely the better fighter, definitely was still dominant. Losing one round is not that bad in hindsight, but he still dominated Chris Wade in that second and third round by grappling. It's a B because he lost one round and he pretty much had to escape a bunch of guillotine attempts. Something I did notice about Islam Makhachev is that he does get guillotined quite consistently, but he always finds a way to escape it. But it can be a bit worrying fighting Poirier, who does like to pull guillotines a lot of the time. Maybe Poirier might get his first one ever. I'm not saying he will, but maybe it might be possible. But we move on to his fourth fight in the UFC against Nick Lentz. Easy A. This one, not much to talk about. It mainly just was Islam grappling this guy up, getting full mount, knee on belly, 3 rounds, 30-27. He might have had a 10-8 in there somewhere. Matter of fact, 2 judges did give him 2 10-8 rounds, so not much to say. Easy A. He just dominated Nick Lentz with the grappling. Again, got full mount several times, good ground and pound at times. Overall, it just was Islam Makhachev using his combat sambo background, using his grappling background, his wrestling background to dominate Nick Lentz, who really wasn't that good. Simple as that. Easy A. We move on to Gleison Tibau, which I'm going to give this fight an A+. Now, Gleison Tibau was a fighter who kind of gave Khabib Nurmagomedov some trouble, which we know Khabib was obviously in the corner with Islam Makhachev. Khabib's dad trained them both, so they had a relationship. We all know this with Islam and Khabib. At the time, Khabib was obviously higher ranked, and so Islam Makhachev was kind of the student in this situation, and Gleison Tibau did give Khabib a lot of trouble. So it was kind of like, okay, Islam versus Tibau. Let's see how Islam fares in comparison to Khabib. And he goes out there, gets an easy overhand left KO, knocks Gleison Tibau out cold. Pretty simple, pretty easy. Solved that narrative. This was an older Gleison Tibau. I believe he was, 34, 35 at the time. Tibau was on a 2-fight losing streak. He actually did pop for roids in his fight before this, so maybe Tibau was a bit off of the sauce. Who knows? But then again, Islam KOing a guy who's on roids out cold in the first round is a pretty good A+ score for me. We move on to Kajun Johnson. Again, this is like an A fight for me. I'm changing my score to an A- because of the fact that that first round was just really both of them at range, not doing much. But again, Islam gets his takedowns, gets what he wants in the grappling, takes down Kajun Johnson with a single leg into a double leg, gets him down, gets the full mount, and then gets the armbar submission. Pretty easy first round sub for Islam Makhachev. Again, there's just not much to talk about in these fights because Islam just goes out there and dominates these guys. It's pretty simple, pretty easy for him. So I'm giving this fight just an A- because of the fact that he didn't do much on the feet, but he still got the takedown and got the submission in the first round. So it gets an A-. Fight me for the A-. I don't care. Again, another dominant, another easy win for Islam Makhachev. Now we move on to another fight where Islam didn't really dominate like how we thought he would. Now, on the scorecards, it tells you he did dominate, but when he fought Arman Tsarukyan, it was a bit of an iffy fight for Islam Makhachev. He still won every single round. However, Arman Tsarukyan gave him some real problems in that first round. And as the fight went on, not so much in the second and third round, but that first round was a really tough round for Islam Makhachev. And the whole fight for him was tough, don't get me wrong. But Arman Tsarukyan, at this point, besides the Adriano Martins KO, was Islam's toughest fight. On the feet, it was close. On the ground, it was close. Islam couldn't really take down Arman Tsarukyan too consistently. He was able to stuff them or scramble out of them. So Arman Tsarukyan came out of this looking better than Islam Makhachev because at the time, Arman Tsarukyan was only 22 years old making his UFC debut, I believe on short notice as well. So in terms of whose stock rose the most from this fight, it was Arman Tsarukyan, but nevertheless, Islam Makhachev still won. So I'm giving this fight only a B+ for Islam Makhachev because he won. He still won 30-27, 29-28 on one scorecard, but it wasn't dominant. He didn't go out there and just smoke Arman Tsarukyan. He got his decision, but Arman Tsarukyan came out of this looking really good and like a future prospect, and that gives Islam only a B+. Now we move on to his next fight, which I do believe, I felt like this was an Islam Makhachev who was evolving in his game. He fought Davi Ramos, who was a grappler, but Islam Makhachev mostly won this fight by being able to outstrike Davi Ramos on the feet, which I believe is just kind of different. And when you compare this Islam who fought Leo Kuntz back in his UFC debut versus the one who fought Davi Ramos, you see a clear night and day difference in the striking. It's just totally a different person, different fighter. He's out there. His striking looks more crisp. He's throwing better shots. He's more patient. His footwork is a million times better. This was an involved Islam Makhachev on the feet. He only shot one takedown in this fight. This was just a really good Islam Makhachev. And even in the third round, he was able to knock down Davi Ramos and then control him for the rest of the round. This was a really dominant performance. He made Davi Ramos look easy. The first round was a bit boring, but after that, Islam really turned it up and was able to outstrike and just outperform Davi Ramos and just get a dominant win. This fight to me is an A+. Now moving on to his next fight against Drew Dober. Now this one, again, another dominant win from Islam Makhachev. Now, Drew Dober just really didn't have much on the ground for Islam Makhachev. Islam went out there, got his takedowns, did what he needed to do, and just pretty much controlled Drew Dober for 3 rounds to eventually getting an arm triangle submission. Watching this fight just felt like, when will we see Islam get a finish? It's going to come at any point now. Eventually in the third round, he gets in half guard, gets the arm triangle, finishes Drew Dober. There wasn't much trouble for him. He only got 3 takedowns in this entire fight, but he controlled Drew Dober for almost 9.5 minutes. It just was a complete dominant performance from Islam Makhachev. This one's an easy A for me. Drew Dober is a tough guy on the feet, but on the ground, Islam Makhachev made this fight look completely easy. An easy A for me. We move on to Thiago Moises. Now, Thiago Moises wasn't necessarily a tough fight for Islam Makhachev. It mainly, again, was Islam dominating the fight. But I think what impressed me the most was Thiago Moises being able to survive and stay alive for 4 rounds of this fight. I'm going to score it an A for Islam here. But again, Thiago Moises didn't really do much in terms of takedown defense. He only stuffed 3 takedowns. But again, this mainly was just Islam Makhachev getting his takedowns, getting control time, and just winning. Again, this was a great performance from Islam Makhachev, but it wasn't a bad performance from Thiago Moises. He hung in there for the most part. He did his job in trying to win this fight. He did provide some pushback to Islam Makhachev. He wasn't out there winning rounds per se, but he was out there at least making this a tough fight for Islam. It's an A, but Thiago Moises will get an A in my opinion, even for losing this fight. Still, at times when you're watching this fight, you're wondering, okay, Islam, get a finish now. Go ahead and finish this guy. He's gassing now. It's the 4th round. Go ahead and get him out of there. 4th round hits, and guess what? He does get his finish, but still, it wasn't the most like, oh my God, Islam is a world beater type performance, even though we kind of already knew he was dangerous. This fight more so proved that Islam can be beaten by somebody. Just Thiago Moises won't be the guy to beat Islam. Can be beaten by somebody in the future. Now, Thiago Moises is not that guy to beat Islam Makhachev, but maybe somebody at the top of lightweight could find a way to beat Islam. That's pretty much the conclusion that we got from this fight. Again, another A for Islam Makhachev. We move on to Dan Hooker. Again, A+. He goes out there, gets his takedown off of a leg kick that Dan Hooker threw, catches the leg, takes down Dan Hooker, and then pretty much after that, goes for this Kimura, sets it up perfectly, gets the Kimura, makes Dan Hooker verbally tap, because we didn't see Dan Hooker actually tap. And once the fight got called off, Dan Hooker did get up to protest, I believe. So it was kind of a weird stoppage, but still, he goes out there, dominates, gets the Kimura submission, finishes Dan Hooker in the 1st round. It was a Dan Hooker on short notice. I believe Dan Hooker fought like a couple weeks before this, had to fly over to Saudi Arabia to fight Islam Makhachev in his own turf. This fight was set up for Islam to win. Dan Hooker ended up being another Islam victim, I guess, in this aspect. Maybe you could give it an A- or an A for the fact that Dan Hooker was coming in on short notice, and he is also a striker, not a grappler. This fight was made for Islam to win. He was on full camp while Dan Hooker was not, so you can duck him some points for that. I'm going to give Islam an A+ anyways for the fact that he went out there and he dominated Dan Hooker, who is a dangerous top-ranked lightweight at that time. So A+ for me for Islam Makhachev. We move on to another fight where it was another fighter on short notice in Bobby Green. Again, this fight can be an A+. I'm giving another A+. Goes out there, gets down Bobby Green, gets the full mount and TKOs him. Now, again, another weird stoppage for Islam Makhachev, and he also fought Bobby Green on short notice. He was supposed to fight Beneil Dariush. Dariush gets injured. Now he has to fight Bobby Green on short notice. I can't blame him for that. Bobby Green is, again, a striker who struggles against guys who grapple, and he just took him down, got the full mount, and then just rained down ground and pound to finish Bobby Green. Again, another weird stoppage. You could duck him some points for that, but I'm going to give him an A+ anyways because he got a first-round finish. It was a good performance from Islam Makhachev. He still was dominant. Why am I making this video? I don't know. I'm already at half an hour into this. I can't stop now. This video is for sure getting uploaded, so I can't waste any more time. He gets an A+ against Bobby Green. We move on to some more relevant stuff that's happening with Islam Makhachev, and that was his championship win over Charles Oliveira. Again, A+ for Islam Makhachev. Trust me, guys, I'm not an Islam fan. I like Islam, but I am not a fan of Islam Makhachev. I actually want him to lose to Dustin Poirier, and I'm not even a Poirier fan. I just dislike Islam more than I dislike Dustin Poirier. But this is the video, and I have to be objective. But he goes out there, and he gets a finish over Charles Oliveira, who's my favorite fighter in the UFC. And this becomes an A+ because he dominated Charles Oliveira, who at the time was the uncrowned champion of lightweight. He just lost his belt to Justin Gaethje in a fight that he won because the weight scales were rigged against him. So, you know what? It is what it is. Islam goes out there. He takes down Oliveira in the first round, controls him. And then second round, he drops him with a counter left hook and then submits him with an arm triangle. Easy peasy. Oliveira taps, gets the belt, A+, championship win. He beat Oliveira at the time, who felt invincible. Again, if you're winning the championship belt and you take it off Charles Oliveira at that time, that deserves an A+ for me. Simple as that. Islam Makhachev gets the win, gets another A+ from Kendall MMA. So many A+ for him. He's lucky that he's good, I guess. But we move on to another fight where I will not be giving him an A+ grade against Alexander Volkanovski, their first fight in the UFC. You can argue he lost his fight. A lot of the media were saying that Volkanovski won the fight but lost the contest. I tend to agree with that. I do believe Islam won this fight, but overall, he did get his ass whooped in that 5th round. He was gassing. He was scared for his life. He was concussed. He got dropped by Volk in that 5th round. It's just weird seeing somebody get back mount in the 3rd round and then somehow get outstruck from that position. Volk was a beast. Volk was on one. This was Perk Volk, in my opinion. This fight to me is a solid C. Just a nice average fight for Islam Makhachev, only because he retained his belt. Nah, I'm just kidding. But overall, Islam Makhachev held his own against Volkanovski on the feet. He hurt him at one point with, I believe, an elbow or a left hook, a counter shot. So Islam felt like he was a good striker, which was kind of weird saying at the time. We know he's mainly a grappler, but it felt like his striking was starting to become properly rated now and not just underrated like how it was in the past. We just didn't see Islam have too many long periods of striking exchanges. So when he fought a top 5 striker in Volkanovski and performed well, that was pretty surprising, I would say. But you know what? He retained his belt, arguably lost in some people's eyes. I don't care if you think he lost. It's a C. It's an average fight only because he got the nod on the scorecards. But you could score it lower, give it a C-, a D even. Not an F fight because, again, he won, but I think a D or a C is the perfect range for this grade for Islam. But it just wasn't a good look in that 5th round with Islam on bottom, eating ground and pound from Volkanovski, and maybe could have been finished if there was more time on the clock, but there wasn't more time. That's just how fighting goes. But a C for me. Moving on to his most recent fight, Volkanovski 2. I have to give it an A+ because he KO'd arguably the #1 pound for pound guy at the time. I know he just beat him on the scorecards in the fight before, but it felt like Volk was the better fighter of the two of them after watching that fight. And he goes out there, he puts it all to rest, head kicks Volkanovski out cold, TKOs him, puts him out of his misery. It was a sad sight to see if you're a Volk fan like me, but you know what? This is the way the cookie crumbled, and he puts down Volk, finishes him in the 1st round via head kick. Easy A+. Not much to say here. The context surrounding it was that Volk won that last fight from most people's eyes. Volk was the more entertaining guy. He was more of the people's champion. He was the underdog in the last fight who surprisingly did better than what people expected. So maybe in this fight, he'll learn from his last fight and be able to beat Islam. Well, that all got shut down, and Islam head kicks him in the 1st round. It's a wrap. It's over. It is what it is. It's an A+ because, again, he puts the whole narrative about him to rest, that he barely won the first fight or that he had lost the first fight versus Volk, and he just pretty much one-ups his last performance by getting a 1st round head kick. Easy A+. Again, Volk was arguably the best pound for pound fighter at that time. I think he still was ranked ahead of Islam in the pound for pound rankings before this fight. So with this fight, he puts the narrative to rest and he becomes the pound for pound #1 guy in the UFC. So it's an A+. I have to give him that. I don't want to, but you know, I have to do what I have to do to make this video. So there you go. That was every single Islam Makhachev fight from 2015 up until now. He's fighting at UFC 302 against Dustin Poirier. I will be doing a full fight prediction breakdown for that. So be on the lookout for that video popping off on this channel soon. If you enjoyed this video, like, subscribe, hit that bell icon for notifications. I'm out of here, guys. Peace.